For WordPress hosting and migration, so I'm going to split this into kind of 2 mini talks. I think it's important if you've got a WordPress website to know what different hosting options there are for there, and also how to move it. If you look at some of the WordPress forums, one of the top questions is, what's the best web host? Seconded by, how do I move my WordPress website to it? So I'll cover these 2 topics tonight. Okay, one of the questions I get asked the most is, what is the best web host? What web host do I use? And a lot of people get disappointed when I say it kind of depends. It depends on what you're looking for, depends on your requirements, it depends on a whole lot of things. So over to you. How would you answer, what does best web host mean? For somebody asked you, what's the best web host? What type of answers would you give them? There's no right or wrong, and there's no judgment. Yep.
Maybe fast performance.
Fast performance, yep, that'd be up there.
Reliability.
Reliability, absolutely.
Easy to use.
Security. Security, that'd be my top one.
Customer service, if there is support.
Support. I mean, if you're not a technical user, you want to be able to pick up a phone or send an email. Those are excellent answers. So for me, I think web hosting is like a pizza. Okay? So everyone's got a base service. Okay? Now you can get a regular base service, but sometimes you might find that the base service is a little bit customized. So you might get a thin, crispy, deep pan, or stuffed crust. So think about that for hosting. That's the base levels. They might offer a little bit difference, as it enters the base system. Then you've got the sauce. Now, some web hosts will just offer a basic vanilla service. Some might kind of have their own customized service. So that's like equivalent of having your homemade sauce from your granny's recipe, or just buying a bottle of Dolmio and slapping it on. This got about 7,000 viral hits when I put this on Facebook. So then we go into the cheese. So I start to get the toppings here. So this is, the things that the web hosts are going to be offering you. Some pizzas just slap on some cheap cheese, whereas others offer all this premium stuff. Apparently, Moose cheese is one of the top valued cheeses that you can get up there. Who knew? And of course, mozzarella is going to go on it. Now, you could throw on some ham. So this would be your cPanel and Plesk, be your DNS editor, your file manager. Yep. Or you can go full out and customize it like SiteGround, and it knows exactly what's in there. All these custom functionalities away from there. So that's your ham versus slow cooked pulled pork. You've taken your time, put a little bit of truffle oil in there. And then lastly, well, we won't get into the pineapple and banana debate. I found this as appalled. So like pineapple and banana, which is quite controversial, when you talk about web hosts, people have these different experiences of what a web host is. So a web host experience is nothing similar, to what another person has had. So you might think GoDaddy is the brilliant because you've had no problems with it, and you pay absolutely nothing a month for that. It's really cheap, no problems. You have other people who are maybe trying to run a full e-commerce website and it's just crashed completely. You have somebody running on a premium system, WP Engine, and they don't like it because it costs so much. And they had one particular thing, a plugin that they wanted to run, but they couldn't. So that's bad for them. Whereas other people run WP Engine with 500 clients, and it's fantastic. So there's no real good answer to this. What is the best web host? It's all determined on what your requirements are and a little bit of a personal touch as well. That being said, let's have a run through some of the types of web hosting services that are most common. So this is a little bit of a generalization, but in general, most web hosts can fit into these 3 categories. So you've got your shared hosting, your VPS, virtual private servers, and the managed WordPress. So if you're looking to start with web hosting, these are usually the 3 options that are available to you when you start out. So running through some of these, shared hosting. Let's jump to the use cases. So why would somebody use a shared hosting? Beginners, just starting out. If you've got a low investment, so you've not got a lot of money. Students, for example, or if you're trying to do this side hustle, your business is not established, so you don't have a lot of money to pay on it. It's usually effective for blogs and information websites. So if maybe you've got your own self-employed, you've got a company website that you just want to get on the web, this might be a good option for that. You're not running a heavy e-commerce system. You're not particularly bothered about SEO and fastness and user interaction, stuff like that. And it's not business critical. You just run it as like a side hustle. Those are the kind of use cases you'd probably think about for shared hosting. And I'll split these into pros and cons. So shared hosting, it's cheap. Another word for cost-effective, cheap. They're usually easy to use. They usually got similar tools like cPanel and Plesk. They've got a file manager there for moving your files up and all the kind of general stuff. Really easy one-click type things. You've usually got integrated features. So you can manage your DNS from there. You can usually spin up some email accounts, things like that. And it's very easy to upgrade. They've usually got 4 or 5 plans, the cheapest, and then one up a little bit, and then a more advanced and like a business. And it's easy for you. It's usually a one click to kind of move up and down. So it's easy to manage. Some of the cons and negatives with shared hosting, if you can think of one of these computers and then shove 300 sites on that computer. So all these sites are then vying for the same CPU, the same memory, the same disk space, the same bandwidth. And that's why sometimes, if you're running on that system, you can kind of feel like your website's a little bit sluggish. And it is because everything else is kind of jammed in there. Poor support is a little bit of a controversial one. I have found this out more often than not, that generally when you take out a cheap hosting, it's kind of like low-cost housing, kind of squashed in there, tenants collecting the rent, and if your light bulb is broken, well, just go out to Woolies and buy another one. So what I find is that support isn't as effective or good when you've got a really low-cost shared hosting. And that's probably because they're more focused on the premium packages that they offer. Not all the time, but it's certainly a common trait. Bad neighbors. So you're sharing this one website with 300 others. All it takes is for one of them to get hacked and become a spam bot or send out lots of emails. That gets the machine IP, like one address, one machine, gets that blacklisted, and all the websites kind of go down for that. And it suffers. So that's one issue that you could have with shared hosting. And another one is potential security issues. So you've got all these websites on the one machine. If something happens for somebody to be able to get access to the machine level through a vulnerability on the website, there's a potential for them to get access to all the other sites on that server, which is not a good thing. The next step up is what we call VPS, or virtual private server. There's some pros for this. So a virtual private server is not a physical machine. What you have is a whole load of physical machines, usually racks in a data center, and they will then build up a software machine for you. And they will allocate that machine the equivalent of, say, 2 CPUs, 16 gigabytes of RAM, that sort of thing. And they use the physical resources to give that virtual server to make sure it has those resources. A VPS is usually ring-bounded, which means that even though there might be 300 different people using that service, they're not all connected with each other. They're all siloed. So if someone managed to break into a VPS, that is just the machine that they can play around with, not anyone else who's linked to that. You've got a greater flexibility. So if you're running a private server, it is a server. So you have full admin control. You can log into the actual server machine itself and play around with it. So you've got that flexibility, which you might need. For example, you might not just be running WordPress. You might be running some sort of app that runs on Node.js that wants to talk to WordPress and things like that. You can do that. You can do anything because it's your own server. So you've got that flexibility. We talked about security and isolation. So it's not connected to any other clients on that server. So it's just that one machine. And it's scalable as well. So generally, you start off with a low configuration, and then you find, more people come to it, or it's struggling, just throw more resources at it. So more RAM, more CPU, obviously you pay a little bit more, but it's scalable to a point. Some use cases, so freelancers with tech skills might want to use this type of system if they've got time to spend on DevOps as well. So DevOps is, your development, your website, and managing the server as well. It's good for frugal investment because, the costs can range from a small one if you're just using limited resources, all the way if you want to, how much you can pay, how much you can scale up. And if you need that server flexibility that I talked about, if you need other things running on that, you can basically do anything you want because it's your server. So some of the cons, as mentioned, it's flexible because you can tailor it to how you want. So the cost can be cheap if you want to run frugally, or it can be really expensive if you're throwing lots of different resources at it. It is complex to run if you're a beginner because you're not only WordPress, now you've got the web server, you've got a database server, you've got PHP, you've got the server operating system, which is usually some sort of variation of Linux to make sure that's all updated and distributed are updated. So it's not just WordPress, you're expanding your whole universe out. There are some resource limits depending on the service provider. You know, if you suddenly decide to run some sort of ad on media TV or something and you get 1 million hits, you might not be able to throw 100 gigabytes of RAM and 400 CPUs on it. You know, it might just be limited to what you can upgrade to. So there are limits depending on the service. And it does require high skills and lots of time. I've managed VPSs for many years, and you do spend a significant amount of time updating operating systems and PHP versions and all that sort of stuff, in addition to your business, in addition to WordPress. So that's a VPS. It is an option. The next one is manage WordPress. So this has come heaps and bounds in the past maybe 4 or 5 years. The pros for this is it's a complete system that's optimized just for WordPress. So a lot of the companies you get VPSs from and shared hosting, they will host anything, not just WordPress. So Laravel, Drupal, anything you want. But these systems are just optimized purely for WordPress. They take care of your WordPress updates. So your core, your plugins, your themes, you don't have to worry about that. They do it all for you and they make sure it works. So if it fails, that's their problem. They get to fix it. It's usually got enhanced security. So what we mean by that is they are involved in the WordPress world. So they are looking at particular WordPress vulnerabilities. So threats to the WordPress system, they are on top of that all the time because it's their system. They don't want it to go down. And usually you get expert WordPress support from there. What I mean by, you might have been in a situation where you maybe been on, and I'm going to drop some names here, GoDaddy or Crazy Domains or SiteGround, and you've had a particular WordPress problem. So maybe your WooCommerce customer hasn't been able to check out a particular product. You don't know why, and you go to the tech support and say, WordPress, WooCommerce, product, and you're like, I have no idea because they're hosting everything. Whereas these managed WordPress systems are usually WordPress experts. They know WordPress inside and out. That's their business. If you go to them with a WordPress problem, 9 out of 10 times they'll be able to resolve it or send you in the right direction to resolve it. So you kind of pay for what you get. If you're a developer, dev tools and integrations galore. So GitHub, continuous integration, deployment, all that sort of goodies are usually built in with these systems. Some of the cons, the cost is a lot more because you're paying somebody to manage WordPress. You're paying somebody to optimize that whole environment for SEO, for speed, for security. Less flexibility in the server control. What I mean by here is because it's optimized for WordPress, because it's optimized for security, you've got boundaries that you have to operate inside. So if you, for example, wanted to run top for like a Node.js or something else, or maybe Drupal and WordPress, maybe you want 2 integrations, then you can't because they specialize in WordPress, not the others. Okay, so there's some less flexibility. You'll find a lot of these managed WordPress hosts that they have plugin restrictions. And again, this is for, they need to make sure that your system runs effectively. So things that drain a lot of resources, they usually ban. So there's plugins like, there's a broken link checker. Excuse me. What that does is it constantly looks through your website and then checking all the links within the blog to make sure that they go to somewhere. And it's a huge resource drain. So that's usually on top of the list. There's other restrictions such as caching. You'll find that these companies have their own hardware cache that's optimized within WordPress. So they don't allow you to put a caching plugin on top of that. So there are plugin restrictions. Some will have limited data centers and support as well. So for example, if you're in Perth and you want a data center in Perth, they might not have one in Perth. Exact support as well. If you're in Perth and your support might be in Sydney, which might not be ideal because you have to wait until they open. So they could have limited data center and support. Okay, so who's going to use this? Established businesses, so people who have got an existing business running over. Certainly business critical, so you don't want this to go down. People who already know that your website is a business investment. You'll tend to find a lot of people who start out are, website's a thing to have, but don't really understand how it integrates into the business and really comes through in the bottom line. These people usually do. People who are happy to outsource WordPress in order to gain more business time. So these are ROI-driven people, and they don't mind paying the higher costs for that. Okay, so I always get somebody at this point asking, what about cloud hosting? So let's have a look at cloud hosting. So what cloud hosting is it's basically scalability on demand. So everything is in the cloud. Your web server is in the cloud, your database is in the cloud. It's used for enterprise businesses. It's usually used with people who have large marketing campaigns that need to spin up lots of web servers at the same time. What it does is it's what they call load balancings. So it'll look at the traffic coming in, and if you need another web server to handle that traffic, it'll spin one up automatically. Same with databases, and it handles all that stuff transparently. It means that you can go from 1,000 visitors a month to 1 million, and it should take care of that automatically. That's what we're talking about, cloud hosting or cloud scaling. It's got reliability or redundancy built in, which means if something goes down, it automatically spins something else up. It's intelligent enough to know when things are broken. And it's mostly maintenance free because it's running on a particular system. So you're basically hands off. You just deal with the WordPress and it handles all the rest. Some of the negative ones, the cost is a little bit different when you talk about cloud hosting. With the other 3 hostings that I talked about, you normally pay monthly or yearly, a fixed price, and you get the whole service. With cloud hosting, you pay for what you use. So we're talking about CPU ticks, so the amount of CPU usage that it uses, the amount of RAM it uses, the amount of instances, web servers that it spins up and spins down, all the infrastructure around that as well that it uses, the routing, everything. Everything is cost-based over an hourly or a tick type system. So it could mean that if you've got no traffic, you might be paying a few dollars a month. Or if you're running Click Frenzy and you suddenly get 1 million users, then you need to have a pretty good credit card because it's going to be a lot of money. So that's why the cost kind of varies. For complexity, it has a huge amount of moving parts. I don't think any one person would be able to run a cloud hosting system just on their own. There's so many different parts to it. You're usually locked into a vendor. So because these things are in the cloud and they all kind of work together and they're all intelligently monitored and run each other's software, you're usually locked in a particular vendor. So for example, Amazon or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud. It means if you want to mix and match things, it's going to be really difficult because the monitoring software might not understand stuff from another vendor. So you're usually locked into one particular vendor if you're looking at cloud hosting. Then you've got the issue with data sovereignty and compliance. So do you know exactly where your data is? If one server goes down or a database goes down, where is it spinning up the next instance and where is it transferring the data to? It could be going back to the US and then going back through somewhere else. So you've got an issue with where exactly is your data being stored, which could be a legal issue that you might have to think about, especially in Europe with the GDPR. So those are the 4 types of rough cloud hosting verticals that you can choose. I tend to go by this rule, which has served me well over the past years. So this is the good, fast, cheap debate. So you can't have all 3. They don't exist. So you can have good and cheap, which is going to be a bit slow. You can have fast and cheap. Usually it's low quality because they're shoving lots of people on the same server to keep their costs down. And good and fast, well, you got to pay for that. So yeah, this has always served me well. So if you're looking for something, that's the rough ballpark you're looking for. You still get people who want all 3. It's difficult. Okay, so here's some web hosting choices. People ask me, where can you go? What do you recommend? This is my idea of the verticals. It's not 100%. They do kind of cross over into different things. But generally, if you're looking at one particular vertical, those would be a good place to start. So we've got our shared hosting, which is the kind of cheaper, low-cost entry things. Crazy Domains, GoDaddy is right at that very extreme. They are super cheap. SiteGround and Ventura IP, they are cheap, but then they can move into the middle ground, which is a little bit dearer. For VPS, DigitalOcean, Vultr, and Linode are the top three if you're looking at going into VPS. Managed WordPress hosting, we've got our own Australian Kinetics, and then we've got the big players, WP Engine, Flywheel, Kinsta. I left Pagely off here, but these are the big American giants that are kind of taking over the whole managed WordPress area. So those would be choices to look at if you're researching those different verticals. So that being said, what are sort of the key features that you should be looking at for any type of web host across any of these? The first one I would always say is SLA uptime or service level agreement uptime. You will find in any web host, in their terms and conditions, in their contracts, it might be in fine print, hidden away down there, but it will definitely be there. They will have a service level agreement. And that's their agreement to provide you with their services. They usually have something called an uptime, which is the time that the service is up and available and running. Most web hosts will be in the 99.9% uptime basis. You'll find very few that's in the other one. So thanks to our WP Engine Aussie guy, Ricky Blacker, in one of his presentations, he calculated what that means basically to us. So if you're in a 99.9% uptime from a web host, basically 0.1% is their allowed downtime. So 0.1% of a day is 1 minute and 26.5 seconds, which comes out for a year of almost 9 hours. So in the agreement, when you pay them and you agree to their terms and conditions, they can have almost 9 hours of downtime legally for your website. That might be in bursts of 10 minutes, 50 minutes here and there, or it could be 8 hours in a complete stretch, and they're legally allowed to do that, and you've got no recourse for that. So that's something to think about, especially if you've got a business critical website. There are a few, WP Engine is one of them, that offers a 99.99% uptime. And just look at the difference, okay? 52 minutes, almost under an hour. So if you're business critical, or if you've got a client who's business critical, that might be one of the kind of key factors that you're looking at. You know, do you want to have 9 hours downtime versus 60 minutes of downtime? And anything over that, they are contractually obliged to give you some recourse from that. So definitely something to have a look at if you're choosing web hosts. One is SSL certificates. I think everyone should be running SSL now. There's still a few people who don't. There's a company called Let's Encrypt. They offer free SSL certificates. Every company should be using those by now. There's no excuse to buy an SSL certificate. There was a big scam about 10 years ago where they would try and sell you insurance and liability if it got hacked through an SSL, but that was never going to happen. It would be unprovable in the courts of law.
Sorry, how can they afford to have it free?
Some of the big companies, Microsoft, Amazon, they all got together and they decided to fund a company who would then generate free SSL certificates because they want to move towards a secure web. Okay. So if any web host asks you to charge for an SSL, that's a big red flag to go away and find someone else. Next thing to look for, a key requirement, is frequency and retention for backups. I'd say all web hosts will take a backup, but what does that mean? Backups are very different. Some web hosts will back up everything in the whole control panel. So your DNS records, your email records, the whole cPanel configuration, and they'll back it up. Now, if you've got emails and things going there separate, you might, if your website crashes or has an issue, you might not want to back up the whole thing. You might just want to back up WordPress, but you can't. You've got to back up the whole server thing, so you might get to lose stuff. Frequency means how often they back up stuff. It's up to themselves. They could back up daily. They could back up weekly. For that, you don't really know. So if you're got an e-commerce website and it goes down, you might have to go back 7 days to get your backup. Retention is even worse. How long do they keep that data for? If your website's been hacked and you've only recently found out, but it got hacked 3 months ago, and they only take a backup, once a month, or keep the backup once a month, you're stuffed. You can't go back to a point where it wasn't hacked. So it's something to look into, is how often do they take backups? How often do they keep it for? And kind of how much do they charge for it as well? Support is key. Is it a local support? Are you a non-technical person that you need to pick up a telephone and say to someone, something's not working, fix it? Yes, sir, they'll go and do it. Or are you not so bothered? Can you wait for a few hours while they come on board in the US, and then you enter the chat bot and they say, have you updated everything? And is it a white screen? You're like, oh, yeah. So it depends on what type of support you want as well. But it is important because things do go wrong. Your WordPress website will crash, something will go wrong. So at some point, you'll need to get in contact with support. So how important is that for you? A little bit about data center location when we're talking about the managed WordPress hosting. But it is important. If your primary audience is in Australia, but your web host is in the US, there's something called latency. And that's the time it takes for the data to get from there over to your audience. It might be a few milliseconds, but that could make a whole difference. And there's also the compliance and legal parts of that. Your data is stored in the US. Are you breaking compliance issues with that? So definitely something to make sure that you know where your data is being stored and where it's traveling to and from. Most of the big players have data centers here in Australia, which is good. Staging and cloning, I think, is an important thing to look at. WordPress is becoming more complex. People are running bigger systems on it, like WooCommerce, LMS, membership sites. These are complicated plugins. And with WordPress, you'll know yourself, you probably run an extra 20 plugins in the background. It only takes one of those, to conflict and the things kind of falling over. Staging and cloning is an easy way to, it's like a one-click that takes your production website and copies it to a temporary area where you can then update everything, see if it works. You usually have an option to clone it back, or you can reproduce those steps on the live website, being confident that it's not going to crash. So that can be quite an important thing, especially for non-technical people. If you went through that white screen of death before, you're like, I don't know what to do. So it could be a really important key factor to look into for web hosting. That's it just now. Any questions so far on web hosting? No? All good? Okay, I'll keep going. I want to keep it going. Okay, next part is moving WordPress. So you've got your WordPress hosting sorted. You know where you want to go. How do you get your WordPress website to there? Okay, so WordPress is a collection of files, and it's a database. It's actually really simple once you get into it. It confuses a lot of users. The terminology, database, a lot of people are not too fussed on what a database are. But in the end, it's just a collection of two things, files and a single database. This is roughly how WordPress works. So you've got a web browser. Somebody types in a URL. It sends it to the web server. WordPress is made up of a collection of files, usually PHP files. That's the language that WordPress is written in. It goes into the web server, and it translates that PHP file. It knows where to put an image, where to put the header, title, where to put the content. Talking about content, it's probably dragging it from the database, and it kind of dynamically squidges it all up and spits out to the web server as HTML. So that's roughly what WordPress is doing. So we've got our files in the middle, our database on the left-hand side. So let's talk about moving files. It's an easy one. Most of you will have access to cPanel or Plesk, which is a GUI interface for your web hosting. They will have something called File Manager in there, and that's a GUI way of being able to access your files on the server. A bit like Windows, a bit like Mac, a bit like Linux. The easiest thing to do is come to your WordPress folder. It's usually called www or public HTML, something like that. And then just select everything and compress it into a zip file. You bring the zip file down onto your local PC. You can do that in different methods. You can use File Manager, actually, to download the zip file. Or you can use a client. There's several transfer methods. FTP is easiest. It's supported by everyone, but it's also unsecure. That means it's just everything's in plain text. So if you're dealing with a client who may have got sensitive data, you might not want to do this option just in case. You should have liability cover just in case. So you maybe not want to try FTP, but if you're trying to bring it down with a client, try and use FTPS, which uses the website's HTTP, the SSL certificate, or SFTP. That uses a secure shell, which is a kind of little command prompt interface to the server. With that, you usually have like what they call a public and private key that you add into the client, and it won't ask for a password. Once you've got the proper keys, it just uses that all the time to exchange. So try avoiding using FTP if possible, and try and use those other two. They've got different ports and different ways of accessing them, and your client will ask you, what's the server address, which directory, what port number, things like that. Here's some popular clients. So WinSCP is good. The reason I like this, and I used it for a long time, it has a master password. So when you're connecting to stuff through FTP, SFTP, you usually kind of save the username and password. But if someone gets hold of your computer or you leave it on the train or something, if it's not protected, they get access to all your client sites. So this has a master password, which is quite good. And then PuTTY, which is another client, or I use PHP Storm, which is an IDE. I'm a developer. It's an integrated development environment. It has stuff in it like SFTP and SSH transfers. It's like an all-in-one package. But there's other clients. There's add-ons for web browsers and things like that. All kind of do roughly the same thing, but WinSCP is probably one of the top ones. So actually getting the stuff down from the server. You have to excuse my voice tonight. All right, so you get the stuff down from the server on your local, and then you just do the opposite into your new web host. You upload it using the same client or using the file manager, and then unzip it. Basically, so files are easy. Everyone knows how to use zip files. The database. Here's the bit that gets a little bit more difficult for WordPress. Before we get into moving the database, we have to understand how WordPress stores its URLs. So there's two types of URLs. There's a relative URL, and there's an absolute URL. So relative URL has a forward slash, and the web server will know that you're talking about its top-level folder system. So you're basically cutting off the domain in the web browser. Okay. The absolute URL has the complete domain name in there. Now, WordPress stores everything as an absolute URL in there, which means it's got the domain name. And that's important to know. Have I skipped a few? Oh, it's missing a couple of slides. Okay, it's good to know because you really should be asking yourself a question up front. Are you moving your WordPress website to the same URL or a different location? So if it's a different URL or a different subdirectory, then you're going to need to change those URLs within the database. If you're moving it like to like, you don't have to worry about that. Okay. Gets even more complex. So there's something called serialized data. Those are arrays. If you don't know what an array is, it's basically like a box. It's got like 0 and add some data, and then 1 and some more data, 2 and some other data. And that's stored in the WordPress database as what's called serial data. And what serial data is, very simply, is it tells you, it stores the value, and then it has the number of characters in that string in the database. So we can see here that particular string, the URL, has 22 characters in it. Now, the reason this is important is that a lot of people will download the SQL, that's the database dump, and they'll just do a text editor rename if they're moving to a different URL. What that would do, if you're moving to maybe willbrown.com/WP for WordPress, then if you're doing a rename, then suddenly that's not 22 characters anymore. And when WordPress looks at it, it doesn't understand it, so it just loses all that data. I've had people try and do this manually when you rename it, and then they log into WordPress, your menus are gone, your theme's gone, all your settings are gone. They're like, oh, that's what happens when the matching doesn't match up. There's some good tools to do this. The best one, I think, is WP Migrate DB. They have a free and a pro. Essentially, what it has, you click on the export, you give it the current URL, the old URL. If it changed, it might not. And it will go through the database, and it will rename all that stuff, the serialized data, with properly. So if you're changing it, it will rename it so that WordPress recognizes it afterwards.
Out of interest, with the 22 you had, how did
Yeah.
you get the 22?
It's a number of characters in that string. So if you count HTTPS, each of those characters is 22.
So without the quotation marks?
Without the quotation marks, yeah.
I counted, I was counting.
Sorry?
I counted 21.
21. Oh, could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 21. My mistake. So it's the best plugin to do that, and it just makes sure that what you're getting out at the end is true, and it'll do all that array stuff for you. You'll get an SQL file or a zip file of the SQL. There's a couple of ways that you can get that into your new web host. As part of your cPanel and your Plesk, you'll find a little file called application called phpMyAdmin, and that is just a GUI interface for the database. So when you have a new web host, they'll create a database for you, or you can create one manually. It'll be blank. All you do is you select the blank one, and then you go up to import, and then find your file that this created, load it in, might take a minute or so, and then that's the whole database uploaded to the new host.
Is there any movement on file size?
There is. So depending on how big your database is, if you've got a huge database, sometimes this can take a long time to load in. And depending on how the web host has their setup, sometimes it can actually crash because it times out. Okay, so you've got this big data file, and you can't get it in using this application because it times out. What you can do in that case is you can actually go into the file system. Raise a support request would be the first thing and give them the file. But you can go into the actual system itself. Most web hosts have what they call a console access or SSH access, and just manually type in MySQL, username, password, and then a little arrow and the file's name, and that will load it in. And because it's on the command line, it can take as long as it wants. So it could be 5 minutes, it could be 10 minutes, it'll still work. So I've used this quite a few times with like huge clients that I can't use phpMyAdmin, and it works every time. A couple of extra things to do. One is when you've moved to your new host, make sure you go into the WordPress configuration file, which is wp-config.php, and you'll make sure that these things are set to the new settings that the web hosts have given you. And you'll normally get, when you sign up to a new web host, you'll normally get a whole suite of information that they send you after you signed up. So just make sure that these all match, because it'll be different from your old system to the new system. It'll be a different database name, different username and password, and a database host, it might not even be, but local host means the same machine, but they could have it on some other machine. So if you're unsure, ask them and they'll give you that information, but make sure that those match up. Otherwise, you'll get error establishing connection to a database. Here's some other migration tools. Some of them are paid for, some of them are free. Some of them do different things. Like some of them will completely move your whole website over. It'll connect to the database system. It'll move it all over. It'll move all your files, your media, stuff like that. Others are just a kind of fancier way of updating things, kind of more UI controls. So Xcloner, Backup Buddy, which is a backup system, but it will also clone your site to a new site. Duplicator Pro, Updraft Plus, Jetpack as well has a paid option to push a website, and Migrate Guru. The one at the bottom is for developers. If you're a developer, WPCLI has pretty much all the commands you need. It's a command level interface to do it all kind of manually from the console, if that's what you want to do. Other things to look out for, there's configuration files like .htaccess, which molds the URL types. It also has folder permissions, so you might need to change some of that. If it comes across, it might be a little bit different. Caching plugins is a good one. So if you're migrating from one host to another, make sure you delete all your caching folders. Otherwise, the URLs are probably going to be pointing to a wrong location. And when you open up the new site, you'll be like, oh, kind of files missing. And security as well. You might find you've got a security plugin and you move to a new web host that you'll have a whole suite of errors or issues or red flags, because the IP is different and some things are slightly different. So just watch out for when you're moving those types of things and just address them and make sure that they're okay. That's it. That's all I have for today. Any questions on that or WordPress in general, just fire them off. And that's my contact details.
With the database details on the WP config file, that's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like it's going to change.
No.
Unless you use it.
You might find that some people have it split into different files. I have it split into 3 different files. I have a wp-config.local, I have a dev and a production. So depending on which server I'm on, it grabs the details from there. It means I only have to FTP that up once on the different environments, and it picks up all the different details for the database and things like that. So that might be the only difference that you see. Anything else? Any general WordPressy questions while I'm here? No, not tonight.
About themes, so do you recommend using themes or is there a blank canvas that you can use?
Themes.
Yeah.
Themes are very dependent on what you want to do, really. There's several themes that are specifically tailored for WooCommerce. Some themes that are tailored for membership sites, information sites, photography sites. So it really depends on what you want to use. There's some popular themes. So Astra is a popular theme. It's got lots of stuff in there. Ocean WP is a popular theme. So these types of themes usually come with the ability to change the header and footer because that's not native to WordPress. And they might throw in some extra tools for those. So those are some you could look at. I use Generate Press as a starter theme for a lot of my clients. It's based on the block editor, basically. So I use that, Generate Press and Generate Blocks. That's my kind of go-to stack at the moment. But I do use Elementor for my other client websites. And they come with their own child theme called Hello, which is a kind of blank canvas that you can build upon. Because if you're using a page builder, you don't really need these fancy themes because you're kind of doubling up on the functionality.
Yeah, that's what I've observed. If I take any random theme, it tends to slow down the page refresh so much.
It depends what's in there. So you can get some really slick themes that only do a few things, or you can get these big themes like Astra, Nevada, and Divi that have all these different things that you can add, but they're loading all those assets for those features that you might never use. So I tend to say try and apply the 20-80% rule when you're looking at themes. If it fits 80% of what you can do, that's good. But don't choose a theme that's doing 80% of stuff that you're not going to use because it's loading in all this stuff that you're never going to use. Yeah, good question.
Continuing with the same topic about performance, do you know any headless things or something that's matching WordPress but headless?
Yeah.
To be better, to have better performance.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this a little bit. If you don't know what headless means, headless means 2 separate systems. You've got WordPress that people will log into, and that's where you put the content, but that's not exposed to the public. You then have another system that's the front end, and that grabs information from WordPress and builds up your front site automatically, dynamically. It's usually flat files, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on the front end, and there's no login. So that's what we call a headless system. There's no themes. There's no WordPress themes for headless because it will never be able to talk to the WordPress site. So you can't get a theme for the front end of a headless. You can't have a WordPress theme for that. What you'd be looking at is frameworks. So it's up to you to develop that front end system. It's up to you to define what templates you need and what data you need to build that dynamically. At the moment, there's a few tools that help you to do that. WP Engine have one. I think it's called Atlas. That has a framework that allows developers to suck the data out from WordPress. And then it's got a loose framework on how you implement that using JavaScript for that. So have a look at Atlas if you're interested in headless. But when you're separating those two together, the WordPress site's never exposed publicly. So therefore, you can't use WordPress themes on it because it doesn't understand what WordPress is.
Sorry, what was your go-to the starter themes?
The ones I use, Generate Press, and there's a plugin called Generate Blocks, which allows me to build 90% of site functionality just with those two things, using the block editor, which is always going to be faster than a page builder. Anything else?
Continuing about the performance, do you recommend any sort of plugins for example, optimization? Because that might slow down the sites a lot.
Yep.
Sometimes it's too big.
Yeah. I always recommend that people do the image optimization on their local PC first. So never upload anything straight from your phone, especially on an iPhone, because it's like 7,000 by 4,000, which is freaking huge. And you don't want your web server to be spending its time optimizing that image, because then it's not spending time serving your website and it's slowing it down. So always do your image optimization on your local PC. You can convert them all to WebP now, and WordPress natively supports WebP. It's a new format. So there's 4 formats generally for images. There's GIFs or GIFs, which is the animated cat things. There's PNG, which is what they call a lossless format. And it's usually got a direct relationship for a pixel you see as a bit of information in the file. So they're good for diagrams and small text within a picture, but they're usually quite large in file size because they've got that extra pixels for clarity. There's JPEG, which is a lossy format, and it comes with different levels of compression. So you can have best quality, it's a high file size, you can reduce the quality. If you go to low, it's all kind of pixelized. It's like your Mario Brothers from the 1980s. It's all blocky stuff. So the idea is you try and get the compression to a reasonable bit where your eye can't see all the compression, but it's a good file size. WebP kind of straddles all three. But if your compression rates from JPEG to WebP, you usually get about 30% extra compression from WebP over JPEG because it's a more intelligent compression ratio. Not always, but more often than not. So for a huge performance increase, you could move all your stuff over to WebP for that. Now, it's a bit of a slog doing that, especially if you've got hundreds of JPEG images on there. It can be done. You basically download all your files to local, get some software on your PC or Mac that will go through everything, compress it all to WebP, FTP it back up. Then you need to, there's some server commands you need to type in to change all the .jpegs to .webps. I've got a blog post on my site about how to do that. That'll give you the biggest performance, convert everything to WebP in the proper size. So make sure that you're that you know what the largest size your theme will display and optimize for that. You know, I've had clients who have, for example, maybe like an 1120 size site container, and their images can only go as high or as long as 1,000, you know, because the boundaries go there. Yet they're still uploading 3,000, 4,000, you know, with images, which is just going to be squashed down. So make sure you know the biggest sizes that your theme is going to output and optimize for that. That's going to give you the biggest performance increase.
Do you know of any AI tools or recommend AI tools that can help you build website?
I can't name them. There are a couple that's just coming on the market that you can describe what you want and it'll build a WordPress website for you. It's very beta. just now. But yeah, there are a couple that are coming on, but it's a very fledgling thing. Yeah. I don't know names, but I've seen some of them. I've seen some services out there. It's kind of scary. Yeah.
Do you recommend, what do you think, sorry, do you recommend like hosting site for like writer service?
For
A writer service,
like copywriting?
your copyright service, where you advertise,
Yeah. So your website would be based on copywriting service and where to host that type of website?
And then the website based on publications for writers, different types of writers.
Okay.
And copywriting is one of them.
Okay. Is it PDFs or would it be just normal text? Normal text. Yeah. I think if you're having a website like that, then I would say that kind of lies more into kind of informational website. So it's not likely to be heavy in resource. It's not like an e-commerce system or a membership system. So you could you could get away with going towards like a shared system for that. So probably not Crazy Domains or GoDaddy, but something along the lines of SiteGround or Venture IP. They've got a couple of packages that are reasonable. So they've got WordPress packages that maybe start something like, I think it's $20 a month for that. And that would easily handle a website like that. But you can always start low, see what it's like. And these shared systems, it's easy to then bump up to the next level for that. And the best thing to do is to run your website through a speed grader, like GTmetrix. Once you've moved, and that will tell you if the website's running slow and what things you need to optimize for that. Yeah, so I would start off small for that type of site, and then just see how it goes, and then upgrade if need be.
So for SEO and high ranking,
yeah,
we want to do it quickly, and running Google Ads and then trying to bring in more traffic. What kind of hosting platform do you recommend? I believe WPS and above.
Yes. Yeah. You want to pay a little bit extra. The question is, how is SEO important? What kind of web hosts would you be looking for? SEO is all about speed. Well, speed and context, but speed is a huge ranking factor. So you want your website to be coming back super fast all the time. Yeah. And for that, there's something called TTFB, which is time to first byte. So do you remember that graphic I showed you when a web client requests something, a web page, and it goes into WordPress, and WordPress takes the file and squash them together? Yeah. Well, time to first byte is whenever all that's happened, it spits it back out to the client. So all that stuff with the web server is doing, it's loading WordPress, it's looking at files, it's translating PHP, it's grabbing stuff from the database, it's squishing it all together, and it boots out the doors in HTML. And then the browser gets it. That's your time to first byte. Now, for the cheaper, and again, I'm bundling stuff up to make it easy, for the cheaper shared hosting, because the speed and optimization is not there, that can usually take a longer time. Yeah. So if you're using one of these website graders like GTmetrix, it will tell you the time to first byte, and you'll see it as a line that comes across. The larger that is, the slower that your page responses are, and that's going to be a significant issue in the SEO. So you want to try and get your time to first byte as fast as possible, and you usually get that from going up to like a more premium web host. I'm saying usually in general. You're always going to have edge cases, but more often, if you're paying for a more premium service, like WP Engine, like Kinsta, you usually find that time to first byte reduces. But it's not just about hosting, it's also about all the stuff you've got in WordPress. If you've got 100 plugins and it's using it all to translate the page, then it's initializing a plugin, it's reading its files, it's getting its resources out. So the more stuff you've got going on in the back end, the slower your time to first byte is. And that is crucial for SEO because it is a huge ranking factor for that. If you've got Google Ads going towards a site, then depending on how much money you're throwing at that, then you're basically driving lots of traffic to that. Yeah, and the more people, the more traffic you have on your website, the more work the web server has to put in, and it's usually got a limit to how much you can serve. And then you need to go up to the next type of machine configuration, more RAM, more CPU, more PP workers. So again, if you're in a low cost, GoDaddy, creates domains type thing, and then you suddenly do a TV ad, a radio ad, and you're going from a few hundred people to now maybe you've got 10,000, it's just going to fall over. You know, so you need to be aware of the traffic you're driving to your website if you're doing things like ad campaigns. Make sure you can handle that type of traffic. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit of embarrassment, you know, like that click frenzy was when it first came out. You know, you went from like nothing to a million, it all went crashed over. It was a bit of egg on IBM's face, that one. Yeah, so lots of things to be aware of. And you can't really put anything in one general category. It all kind of depends, you know, but hopefully that's kind of helped you on your journey to thinking about what type of web host your website should be running on. I'm going to end up for tonight. Otherwise, I keep going on and on, but thanks very much. Yeah, turn up next month. Yeah, thank you very much.